Hello, everyone. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. This is James Interviews, episode 19. And today I have with me as my guest, Kevin, the non-traditional Catholic. He goes by the moniker, and correct me if I'm wrong, Kevin, but Nontradicath. Is that how you say it?
Yeah, Nontradicath. Yeah, it's a fake last name, obviously. I'm not that weird about my real last name. My real last name is O'Connor. I'm going to be honest. The reason I use the Nontradicath moniker is more to save my family from being inundated with my videos.
Yeah.
They don't want to see it, and I don't want them to have to see it if they don't want to. So I use the Nontradicath moniker, but there is no right or wrong way for you to say it. So however you say it is correct because it's a fake last name anyway. So.
Gotcha. Right. So, yeah, I'm really happy to have you on. And today we're going to be talking about things such as, deconversion, deconstruction, apostasy, why Kevin is not Catholic anymore, things of this nature, and maybe some philosophical stuff like nominalism. I know that you're really into that. Just for my, setup here, I've seen some of your interviews with other people. And I know I'm pretty familiar with your background, but for those who might not be familiar, hearing the name non-trad Catholic assumes that you were once a trad Catholic. So can you tell us a bit about your upbringing and so forth? Because you were born into the Catholic Church.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I'll try to keep this in under 3 hours, I suppose. But I was born into the traditionalist chapel that my grandparents founded. So it's an FSSP chapel. My grandparents founded it at the time when the FSSP was brand new. So when they first founded it, there was a question: is it SSPX? Is it FSSP? There was actually a vote within the church. This was all before I was born. FSSP won, so we became an FSSP chapel. I went to school at that chapel. School like this, it's more like homeschooling than real school. My graduating 8th grade class was 4 kids, including me. Yeah, so kind of like a homeschooling co-op where my parents so my mom was a substitute teacher, but my friends' parents were like the permanent teachers. The priests, the FSSP priests were our teachers for certain classes like Latin and religion. I was an MC, so that's the highest ranking altar boy in the traditionalist mass. So I was in it. I was a real Catholic for sure. I thought I wanted to be a priest when I was younger. My confirmation name is John Vianney, the patron saint of priests. And I have a brother who went to the seminary, the FSSP seminary in Nebraska. He discerned out, so he's not going to be a priest. But I have a cousin who I grew up a mile down the road from my cousins. We're kind of like a tight-knit Irish family. And my cousin is still in the seminary. He's in his 5th year, so he's almost definitely going to be an FSSP priest. So I say all this just to kind of get my Catholic credentials out there. I was a real Catholic. I wasn't some kind of Catholic in name only, Creaster kind of thing. No, I was going to Mass 6 days a week for the most part. And the only day of the week that I wasn't going to Mass was Saturday, and most Saturdays I went to confession. So I was at the church that my grandparents founded almost every day for a long, long part of my life. So that's kind of my very brief background with all my Catholic credentials.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And I was going to say, when you mentioned O'Connor at first, I was like, oh yeah, that is a very Irish name.
Yes.
So yeah. I appreciate you sharing that. And I was about to say, I have some experience with the FSSP and other Latin Mass communities as well. So that's what kind of perked my interest, was that it was more one of the traditionalist groups. I've met, several SSPX people, which, there's a lot of multiple good reasons to leave that, but that's for another episode.
Yeah.
I did want to pick up something that you said, though, because when you talked about Catholic credentials, because, it's interesting because for me, when I went from being a Calvinist to being Catholic, and I found this theme throughout different religious groups too, and I'll ask if this is your experience too. It seems like there's 2 responses when people change beliefs. Some of the reactions I got when I went from Reformed to being Catholic were either like, you were spiritually dead the whole time, you never really believed. You were just, it was just dead faith, but all intellect and all reading and stuff, because I read my way into the church pretty much. And then the other response was, pretty much you're stupid. You don't understand Reformed theology. You haven't read enough Bavinck or Berkhoff or Berkouwer or any whatever Reformed scholastic or niche Reformed issue or whatever hot take on predestination or whatever. You haven't done the Talmudic knot untying that we require you in order to be, a true former Reformed.
Right.
So it's sort of damned if you do, damned if you don't type of thing. Was this was this kind of the reaction with you when you left Catholicism?
100%. So, I didn't get into my like deconversion story yet. I mean, I can briefly, but what I'll say here is that I didn't go public with my lack of religious belief until I was moving a time zone away. So I grew up in northern New Jersey, and I got a job that was going to take me out to the Chicagoland area. So moving 800 some odd miles from home. And I had been with my girlfriend at the time for 5 years. And so she was coming with me, whether or not like I knew my parents wouldn't be okay with it.
Right.
So I wasn't going to hide that from them. So I just told them like, hey, mom and dad, I'm not religious anymore. And my girlfriend's moving with me to Illinois. So, in hindsight, definitely not the right way to just drop two bombshells on my parents at the same time. But that invited a lot of, oh, well, you just want to live in sin comments.
Yes. Yeah.
Hopefully my videos make it apparent that that's not what happened. My deconversion, like my actual deconversion, obviously it's like, you can't put a day on it, right? Like it's a process.
Sure. Yeah.
I wasn't Catholic anymore like 2 years before I told my parents I was going to be moving to Illinois. And by the way, my girlfriend is coming with me. I find the "you just wanted to live in sin" comments particularly ironic now, though, because I actually let the family pressure get to me, and I got married to her before we moved. So we had a 3-month engagement, and we got married in the FSSP chapel that my grandparents founded. And I did all of this to just appease my family. In hindsight, that's not the right way to go about things. You should not get married just to appease your family. Luckily for me, my wife is the most awesome person ever, and I'm the most luckiest man ever. And I can't imagine not being married to her, and it's the best thing that's ever happened to me. But we both agree that the way that we got married wasn't the right way to get married.
Sure. Yeah.
So both of those things are true at the same time. I love being married to her, and we both agree that we wish we could have gotten married under different circumstances. But all that to say is, I didn't live in sin. I didn't. I got married. I did the Catholic thing. I did
Right.
it.
Yeah. Right.
And then the other part of your question was, do you ever get you just didn't read the right question in the Summa Theologica, and then you would have stayed Catholic? Yes, I got that as well. Which I found like really insulting. I mean, they're both really insulting.
Yes.
But the book reading one was super insulting too. Like maybe more insulting in a way. Because like I did do a lot of reading. Like I was obsessed. I still am obsessed, frankly. Like it takes up like
Sure.
a decent part of my brain is still dedicated to like this kind of stuff.
Right.
And just the insinuation that like, oh, like, if you had just read, the right quote from Thomas Aquinas, you would have stayed Catholic. It's kind of like, well, I don't think that you have a proper understanding of human cognition, because like one quote isn't going to, convince somebody. It's like a whole collection of things. So, so yes, I got both, and they're both pretty insulting for sure.
Yeah, and I do want to go and dive more into that subject, but first, just for chronology's sake, when was it and what was it, if you don't mind sharing, that made you realize that, you know what, I don't believe this anymore? I understand that's a process. I've known many people that have deconverted, and so I'm just wondering, what was that like for you? Like what and how old were you too as well, if you don't mind sharing that?
Yeah. So like you said, it is a process. So I'm going to highlight a few key moments in a multi-year kind of string of events. So I grew up a young Earth creationist, as a lot of trads do.
Oh,
At
yeah.
least they used to. And it wasn't until high school that I dropped my young Earth creationism. I was that kid who like raised his hand during biology class and said, Professor, actually, they did find human dinosaurs next to, or human bones next to dinosaur bones. I read it in a Ken
Freudian
Ham.
slip.
Yes, yes.
Sorry.
So, but I dropped my young Earth creationism in high school. But in high school, I remained Catholic. So I dropped some of the trad stuff in high school, but I definitely remained Catholic. When I first started dating my wife, I was 17. And I like brought her to church with me all the time. She was Catholic, but she was kind of culturally Catholic, not super religious. She's Italian, so she's Italian in the way that like all New Jersey Italians are Catholic, you know?
Yes,
But it's a cultural thing. It's like not really a religious thing for them. So I would bring her to mass with me. And I would tell her like we're raising our kids in the chapel that my grandparents founded because that's what we do, and we're trads, and this is how trads are. But then in college, slowly beliefs started chipping away. And the thing that I kind of referred to as like the spark that lit the flame was I found out that one of my friends from the church that I grew up in was gay. And I was like, oh, wow. Like, I know that being gay is, well, not being gay, but I know that acting on, homosexual desires is considered a sin by the Catholic Church.
Right, yeah.
I lacked this moral intuition that was true. But I was like, hey, the church doesn't rely on moral intuitions, right? The church has a reason for teaching what it teaches. So let me dive into that. Let me dig into it. So I did. And I started reading about teleology. And I started reading about how really Catholic Church has this teleological view of morality. So morality is all about teleology.
Mm-hmm.
And I just didn't find that to ring true to me. I didn't think that like frustrating the end of a thing is immoral. I didn't think that's what morality was all about. At the time, I wasn't sure what morality was all about, but I was like, I'm pretty sure it's not teleological in nature. And so I kind of thought to myself, like, oh shoot, I disagree with the Catholic Church on morality. That's kind of a big deal. Like,
yeah.
So let me look into other Catholic stuff too, and like because if I can disagree with the church on morality, what if I disagree about other stuff? So the next thing after that, the next thing after that was just transubstantiation. I was like, do I really believe this? So I started reading about hylomorphism, right, and like the difference between accidents and substances and stuff like that. And I just realized I'm like, I don't think that substances exist either. So I wouldn't have like called myself a nominalist at the time. But like a year after that, I did. Like I started reading more and more and more about it. So these beliefs started slowly chipping away. And throughout like my 4 years of college, I entered college as like a definitely a Catholic, still even a traditionalist Catholic, but just a traditionalist Catholic who doesn't think that the Novus Ordo is like intrinsically evil, and also evolution definitely happened, and also the Earth is more than 6,000 years old. But otherwise, still a trad.
But I will interrupt just to say I appreciate your kitty in the background. He passed you by, but yeah.
Oh, okay. I've got 4, so they'll make guest appearances.
Sorry, that was my ADHD moment. I was just like kidding.
I do the same thing.
Sorry, go ahead.
But so in college, I over the course of the 4 years, I stopped identifying as like a trad Catholic, and I started thinking about myself as more of like just a Catholic. Like, okay, not trad anymore. Vatican II had some really good points. Definitely still Catholic though. Then I so I started attending Cru. I don't know if like what Cru is, like the Campus Crusade for Christ.
Oh yeah.
So I started attending Cru meetings, and I was chatting with a lot of non-Catholic Christians, and I was like, okay, maybe what I really am is I'm like a non-Catholic Christian, or at least like I'm a mere Christian a la C.S. Lewis. So then I called myself like a mere Christian for like a hot minute there. And then I was like, oh man, I started really getting into like biblical criticism and stuff like that.
Oh yeah.
And then I was like, oh, all right. maybe Jesus is more like, maybe it's more about this, like the symbolism than it is about like the historicity of Jesus or something like that. Well, am I really a Christian if I'm not willing to like affirm like the historicity of the resurrection? Okay, maybe I'm just a theist. And then after a while of like being a theist, I remember thinking like, oh man, I actually don't even know if I like think the Kalam is quite right. And if I don't think the Kalam is quite right, maybe I should just call myself like a deist. Like God is whatever set everything in motion, and then that's it. I remember actually slipping into is like not the right language, but I called myself an atheist for like a little bit. Like a year maybe I called myself an atheist. But realistically, I don't think I was even an atheist then. I think I was always an agnostic, at least in terms, like, you know, some people make a big deal about definitions like atheist and lack theist and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I think I was always like your lack theist, you know, connotation of atheist. I still am, really. If like, you know, I'm an agnostic, and agnosticism is kind of lack theism, kind of. But I also never found myself really agreeing with like a lot. Like I feel like atheism comes with other things too. Like most of the people who like are like atheists like generally carry a bunch of other like political kind of like leanings that I just didn't share. So that's partially why I call myself an agnostic. It's just because like I feel like, well, first of all, it's true. Like I don't have strong arguments against the existence of God. So in that sense, I am an agnostic, like, you know, per the definition. But then also I just don't share like the political leanings of a lot of the like strong atheist types. So agnostic is the label that I use now. So that's kind of the timeline. Oh, and then just to put all of that into perspective, I'm talking about college, like you guys know how old I am. I'm 27. So
we're the same age. Okay.
Oh, okay, cool. So
Yeah.
college was 5 years ago for me. So I left. So I moved from New Jersey to Illinois in 2018. So just to put things into perspective.
Gotcha. Yeah. Wow. That's a lot. I appreciate that. Yeah. Because I was about to say, because like, I mean, there's different, you know, atheist philosophers like J.L. Mackie and Graham Oppie who will talk about, you know, philosophical dictionary definition. Atheism is positive argument against theistic arguments to say that God does not exist. That is one form of atheism. Obviously, it's an umbrella with different forms and variations and so forth, different denominations, if you will. But I appreciate that, Kevin. And I guess another question I have for you is, would you say, so with agnosticism, because I know even this gets defined in different ways too, would you say that it's more about the knowledge capacity that we have about religious and historical sources mitigates like against a higher probability of belief? Such that, like, because I asked that because you talked about biblical criticism before, and a lot of people I know that are agnostic who've studied biblical criticism tend to find more critical methods of study and so forth, and various conclusions, whether it's by like Schweitzer or Bart Ehrman or others, or like Paula Fredrickson, who's great. Fantastic. I love Paula Fredrickson.
I love Paula Fredrickson.
Yeah, she's great. They usually they usually argue that it was actually biblical studies that led them to agnosticism. Bart Ehrman has a similar like quote where he said that I'm an atheist in regards to the God of the Bible, but to any other deity, I'm agnostic about, basically. So would that be fair of you or no?
Yeah,
or more complicated?
It is. I don't think that. So I'm like super sympathetic to, and I don't think I'm even super removed from this like conception of God as like a force of nature or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes the hippy dippy types or the really informed panentheists and stuff like that.
Yeah, right.
Get into a conversation with me, and I realize that I don't like disagree with them like a whole lot. And what I mean by that is like I'm somebody who had like, I don't know for certain, but I don't think that it's turtles all the way down. And if I don't think that it's turtles all the way down, that means that I think that there's something at the bottom of all of it. And what is that thing? I'm content with just calling that thing like the cosmos. But like a lot of like panentheism is kind of just like, no, God is the cosmos. And then I'm kind of like, okay, you got me. Like then I guess I'm a panentheist.
Mm-hmm.
I don't tend to talk like that because most people's conception of God is not the panentheistic like conception of God.
Right. Yeah.
So I use the agnostic label, but I use the agnostic label more out of convenience and like less out of accuracy, which might not be the most like rigorous approach. But I find that it helps the most in conversations, if that makes sense.
It does. Yeah. Because I was gonna say, I mean, there's panentheism is something I need to brush myself up on, because I've been doing more like reading recently. I've been like into Eastern Orthodox thinkers and stuff, and like Bulgakov and Saint Gregory Palamas and so forth. And obviously they were panentheists like to the max. So I don't know. I guess maybe someone could just be like, become Orthodox with that, with panentheism.
Yeah.
Or Eastern Catholic, I guess.
And you know what's funny too is that I have a lot of people who will say something to me along the lines of like, well, Kevin, you just haven't looked at X religion. Most often I get this from like non-Catholic Christians, not even mostly the Orthodox. It's mostly coming from Protestants. Because like when people ask me like, oh, like, you know, what kickstarted your agnosticism, I'll say something like teleology. They'll say something to the effect of like, well, that's a strictly Catholic thing. Like, why not just be Baptist or Anglican or, you know, insert whatever Protestant denomination you want. And my canned response here is that there's only so much time in one lifetime, and you can spend your whole life looking into the Catholic Church and not find out everything that there is to find out just about the Catholic Church. I was born Catholic, and I've kind of made Catholicism my pet project. If it turns out that the Hindus are right, I'm not going to find out in this life. But if I get another one, I promise that I will dedicate it to studying Hinduism. And that's kind of my canned response to that question. There's only so much time in the day. I was born Catholic. Catholicism is my pet project. And if I spend my whole life like looking into Catholicism, dying thinking Catholicism isn't correct, and then it turns out that the Hindus are right, I just hope that Krishna has mercy on me. Like that's really all I can say, you know?
Right. And you know, yeah, there's a lot there. I mean, one thought that came to my head was well, actually a little bit of pushback on whatever that friend was saying about or whoever told you about well, teleology is a strictly Catholic thing. It's like, well, I've known growing up I grew up in the Southern Baptist Convention, and there's plenty of Southern Baptists that hold to classical theism. So there's plenty of like Baptist Thomists out there. Kitty, he's stealing the show. Is he Catholic? Yeah.
I made that joke to the priest who was doing my pre-cana, and he groaned so hard. It was so funny. I have a different cat. So this is Molly, but my cat is Jack. Jack is a black cat with a little tuft of white right here. So, and I call it his priest collar. Like, it looks like a collar that a priest wears. And
That's
so I told Father McNeely that he's Catholic, and Father McNeely said, "Oh," I said, "Sorry." Yeah. But to your point, yes, there are a lot of non-Catholic classical theists and Thomists and stuff. So that is all right. I think whatever Protestant said this to me was just not a classical theist himself, probably.
Gotcha. Yeah. So I know that the cat thing came, and then there was the puns. I was trying to remember what I was asking you. I think it was about So with the your agnosticism being based on like with regards to knowledge with the historical sources. I know also, of course, you have the philosophical concerns with nominalism as well. But do you think one of those is greater than the other in your mind, or are they sort of equal?
Man, that's a really good question. It's hard to like know exactly how your beliefs are formed.
Yeah, yeah.
But if I had to guess, I would think that the like the nominalism and the mereological nihilism and like the philosophical disagreements with the Catholic Church are a bigger part of my agnosticism than like the textual criticism stuff. That's what I think. I think the philosophical stuff is like like more, and like, if again, I think putting numbers to things can be kind of silly, but just to try to illustrate, I think I'm something like 60-40, maybe
Gotcha.
maybe 70-30, something like that. So like significantly more, but like it's not that textual criticism plays an unimportant part. It's possible that if I had my philosophical disagreements with the church, but I didn't have any kind of historical disagreements, that I might just be a non-Catholic Christian. You know what I mean? Like that's
Yeah, right.
possible. So,
Yeah,
but again, it's hard to know for sure.
yeah, that makes sense. It's the other thing too that you said is that one of your friends was gay, and this has been a difficult thing for me as well because um, uh, traditionalist Catholics, especially, but even other Catholics, are not really the nicest of people per se,
No, they
and
are not.
so I've had gay people in my family, I've had gay friends, and so it is um, it is hard. It's in the compassionate part of most people. It leads them to look at different moral teachings and wonder if they themselves actually believe it. And I've noticed that a lot of more Christians have become progressive Christians for this reason alone, pretty much. They might be very conservative in other areas, like they may still believe like in inerrancy or the Trinity or other various things, but they can't really get past certain sexual teachings of the Catholic Church or other churches as well. And um, I also, I'll just do it now, make the announcement now, and then kind of backward it. But because everyone on my channel, I mean, for the last 2 years or so, I've been in the process of deconstructing and reconstructing too. It's a lot of ping pong. Like, there's some days where um, I'm more agnostic, and other days I'm more anti-theist and kind of burn it all down. Um, and so, and those that are close to me know this. This is not news. My very close friends know this about me. Have known this about me for like 2 or 3 years. So no shock there. But I wanted to let my viewers know that that's where I'm at right now. I'm not Catholic, but I'm not Catholic either. I'm still figuring that out, and I've I love history. I've read like 42 books on the history of the papacy. I've like really dug into stuff, and I keep on. The more I read and research, like especially like the papacy is a good example. I still can't not find steel-manned, like agnostic arguments or at least interpretations. Oh hey, are you saying I'm bearing false witness
No,
or?
no, I'm saying this is a book about about the history of the Catholic Church. So,
Right. That's actually on my reading list. I've been meaning to get to that for a while.
I like it. I didn't find anything that, like, there was nothing in here that I was like, this is apologetics nonsense. There was none of that in
Right.
here. I is it biased towards the Catholic Church? Yeah, but did the Catholic Church do a heck of a lot of good stuff?
Oh
Yeah.
yeah. Oh
So
yeah.
so I like it, and I read. This was me trying to show you same. Same. I read about the Catholic Church. I appreciate the good stuff that the Catholic Church has done, even if I have philosophical disagreements with the Catholic Church. Those two things can coexist.
Definitely. Yeah, I agree. And um, the other thing is that this is a lot of this is so much process, and it's not you're never done because like I mean I plan on getting back into school and education and stuff. A lot of my education has been religion based or theology based, and so I'm trying to take a different turn and um, without getting into all the details, but I just wanted to make that announcement for everyone just so that there's not confusion. So this because I want this channel. The goal of this channel is to foster intellectual conversations with guests on different topics that I find worthwhile, and I think that are objectively worthwhile as well too, that people care about. So Yeah, I just wanted to make that announcement, and I'll probably do a more descriptive like pre thing. Um,
I know you didn't make the announcement for me. You made it for your audience, but I just want to say I think that the place that you're in right now is a really cool place to be. And I say that with a little bit of bias, right? Because I'm in the exact same place, but it's an honest place. And
yeah,
I don't know about you, but I felt really dishonest for the last couple of years, like 2 years of being Catholic. I was like, I call myself Catholic, but man, like, I don't know about this. I don't know about that. I don't know about this. I don't know about that. And like, after a while, it started to feel like I was lying to myself and to others about
yeah,
like I'm calling myself Catholic, but I don't actually believe in all the stuff that you're supposed to believe in to be a Catholic. And so just being honest enough to tell yourself, hey, I'm not Catholic, but it's part of my culture. I have a great admiration for a lot of aspects of the Catholic Church. But I do call out the church in places where I think that they did something bad or something that I just plain old disagree with. Like I just think the church is wrong about, teleology, whatever. I think it's a really cool place to be where you can actually be honest with yourself and with others. And it's a vulnerable place to be, and it's kind of scary. And you don't have any friends on either side, really, because, like, you're not atheist enough for all the atheists, and you're not Catholic enough for the Catholics.
right, yeah,
But I think it's a cool place to be. I like the journey, and to me, agnosticism is the journey. So, I didn't. I thought I thought you were Catholic. This like Catholic. Because I've watched a decent number of your interviews, and I think this
I
is
appreciate that.
and this is the first time that you've made that announcement, to my knowledge, right? So,
Yeah.
so I'm honored that you did it with me on the phone. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I thought it would be good to do with you. I thought um, it would be fitting. It would be fitting this, I thought it would be fitting though to say it with you. And I've been meaning to do it for a while, but there's just been various things, financial stuff, job situation, and so on and so forth. Looking at different schools. Um, but yeah, I mean, I also I'm making the announcement too because I'm still going to make similar content, but also I want the channel to go in a different direction as well. I want more interviews like this and more discussions like this. But I am going to have thoughtful people on, thoughtful theists on. Like I plan on having Swan Sona on, who's a dear friend of mine. Um, he knows all about this. None of this is no surprise to him. Um,
One of my favorite shows that I've done on my show was with Swan. So,
yeah, I love that episode. I watched that, and it was great. And actually, to be honest, this is something I wanted to talk about too. Is that after watching, I was like, I don't think I'm a nominalist, and that's kind of uncomfortable because I was like, I go back and forth on it though because it's like I can understand. Like to me, it's more of like when I see like atheist memes about like making fun of like transubstantiation or something like that, and it goes something along the lines of like, oh, you're like worshiping bread, or like Lawrence Krauss and Sam Harris say like, oh, you believe that a cracker becomes like a first century Jew, and it's like that's a very crass and simplistic way of saying it. It's like, look, even if you don't believe in it, internally with the paradigm and the metaphysics, it makes sense. I think that's at least fair to say that it makes sense internally. If you want to critique the existence of substance, fine, go have at it.
Yes.
But it's not really prima facie stupid without assuming other various philosophical influences, which, I mean, to be honest, Sam Harris and Lawrence Krauss have a lot of massive lacking in philosophical a priori and epistemology. And
yes.
do it.
Neither of them are philosophers. That is for sure.
Yeah.
And I 100% agree with you that it makes absolutely no sense at all to critique transubstantiation as if hylomorphism was false. It's like, well, just critique hylomorphism.
Right.
Because like when you critique hylomorphism, that kind of renders transubstantiation like a moot point. Like if there are no substances, then transubstantiation doesn't really make a whole lot of like, what are we even talking about at that point? But to criticize it without criticizing like realism as a whole, to me seems like a little like putting the cart before the horse almost. You know what I mean?
Oh, definitely. Because I mean, otherwise what you're doing is you're making a presuppositional argument and you're no better than a fundamentalist that you're criticizing.
Yeah.
It's fideistic. Like it's kind of absurd, and it's this really stupid argument. It's like you have to explain and justify your claims and your beliefs, like everyone does. Like you can't just make, like Nietzsche had this great phrase that you can't just make a supposition without substantiation. You have to actually back up what you're saying with some type of evidence or with some type of argument, because of course there's different theories of knowledge and different theories of evidence, how you interpret that, and so on and so forth. Whether or not there can be actual knowledge, moral, like empirical skepticism or skepticism about knowledge and epistemology and stuff like that, versus like realist views, et cetera, et cetera. But it's like no matter what view you hold to philosophically, you have to justify it. And to me, I hear a lot of assertions being made in that type of like, meme world. Of course, it's the massively comes from the religious side too, as well, to be sure. But it doesn't help the conversation. And so yeah, if you want to talk about if you had like an elevator pitch for like nominalism, what nominalism is, how would you like describe it?
Yeah, so I guess if I had an elevator pitch for like what is nominalism, I would kind of say something to the effect of like if I held up like one coffee cup, like how many things are here? And if your gut reaction is like just one coffee cup, I would say, congrats, you're a nominalist. If you say though, well, at least like 17, because, you have the accidents that make up the cup, but then you have, the substance of blueness, and you have the substance of redness, and you have the substance of cupness, right? And perhaps you have like the substance of like cylindricality, and perhaps, okay, you're a realist. And I think to a lot of people, especially I'm going to pick on people like me. So I have a degree in engineering. I'm very empirically minded. So I think for people like me who are more empirically minded, nominalism is just intuitively correct. But moving beyond intuition, William of Ockham said that you shouldn't multiply things into your ontology without reason. And most realists are going to agree that substances are causally inert. And if we have these causally inert, totally unfalsifiable things, I see no reason to multiply them into our ontology. So that's kind of my elevator pitch, is just, hey, we don't need them, so let's not posit them.
Yeah, that actually makes sense.
Yeah.
That's something I really need to do more reading on for sure.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because like, I'm more used to, like initially I was introduced to nominalism more from the theological side of things with regards to like justification and like the Protestant Reformation, and the late medievals, Occam included, but other late medievals, and some of like
more
Luther.
like Luther and stuff like that, right?
Right, yeah, some of Luther's tutors and how he applied it
Yep.
to extra nos imputation, alien righteousness of Christ, versus the Catholic realist view of infused grace.
Yeah, the nominalism of Occam is like considerably, because Occam was obviously pre-Reformation, so like.
Oh yeah, right.
So it's pretty like different. And honestly, like I think that nominalism kind of means different things to different people, almost. You know what I mean? So sometimes when I say I'm a nominalist, people will be like, "Oh, well, like you're nominally interested in what? Like you're not like you're a nominal Catholic?" I'm like, no, that is not what I mean. I'm not a nominal Catholic. I'm a nominalist. Like I just don't think that substance. Like, I don't think that universals exist. It's totally different.
Right.
And William of Ockham, for the record, was a nominalist Catholic. He was a Catholic. He was never excommunicated or anything like that. And there are tons of nominalist theists out there. Like Dr. Kenny Boyce is my go-to theist nominalist. He's not Catholic. He's Christian. So I don't know what sect of Christian he is, but I know he's not Catholic. But he's a nominalist, so it can be done. That's my elevator pitch on it.
Yeah, I appreciate that, because I was going to say, yeah, a lot of like Calvinist, Reformed, and Baptists and other types are philosophers are nominalist or somewhere on that
Yep.
end of things.
Yep.
What about, have you ever gotten like questions about like, well, why don't you just adopt a sort of, SCOTUS view of like moderate nominalism with realism in your ontology and metaphysics?
Yeah, I mean that's almost like Aquinas too, right? Because Aquinas was like the original, like the OG, like moderate realist, right? Um, and I'm certainly like more sympathetic to a moderate realism than I am to like a Platonic realism. And for the record, I think Plato is more sympathetic to a moderate realism than a Platonic realism. Like I think that like the historians have gotten Plato wrong. I don't think Plato himself was a Platonist, but that's all besides the point.
Interesting.
That's all besides the point though. At the end of the day, both the Platonist and the moderate realist will agree that like the thing that like it like the redness in this cup like is a substance, and their only disagreement is that like the Platonists would say that like the like redness could exist sans any red things, and the moderate realist would say like no, redness wouldn't exist if there wasn't any red things. But they both agree that redness exists. And
Right.
I
Yeah.
don't think that redness exists, redness per se. What I do think exists are photons, and the photons bounce off of the atoms that make up this, the red part of the mug, and those photons hit my eyeball at a certain wavelength, and the neurons in my brain they create certain chemicals that I subjectively experience as redness. But note that none of this requires the existence of a substance of redness to actually explain my experience of redness. My experience of redness can be completely explained using only concreta, namely the atoms in my cup, the photons that hit my eye, the neurons in my brain. That's it. Those are all concreta. I do not need abstracta in order to explain my experience of redness. So yeah, that's kind of my 2 cents.
Well, do you mind if I ask you a question, just
Yeah.
sort of play devil's advocate? Because I could see someone saying, well, wait a minute, Kevin, your subjective experience and also the actual physicality of the process of the experience of how your brain is receiving those photons is not necessarily mitigating the claims of realism necessarily, because it could be the case that abstracta is prior to your natural and scientific experience, and that is merely the mechanism by which the abstracta that precedes it is experienced in real time in nature, and it would be expected to experience at least some forms of abstracta within time, since we are temporal creatures and so forth, and we have certain perceptions and so on and so forth, unless you're colorblind, which that would be another thing. But it's not necessarily like an argument for like redness, but I could see someone saying that, well, there's a prior thing happening, and what you've explained is really just the physical process by which you would obtain redness or see redness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so this is where Occam's razor comes in. So it sounds like this person in this hypothetical is actually agreeing with me in terms of the like everything that I said, the person would agree with me, and then they would just go a step further. They'd be like, yes, you're right. We can explain all this stuff about redness using only the concreta, but I just think that there's also this abstracta that is prior to the concreta and does not interact with the concreta in any detectable way. And at that point, I say, well, we shouldn't posit things into our ontology without necessity. And if redness, the substance, has no additional explanatory power versus just the photons and the atoms and my eyeballs, let's not posit it. Let's apply Occam's razor and just shave off the concreta. Shave off the abstracta, because they have no explanatory power. Let's not rely on them. They don't benefit us at all.
Yeah, and I think at that point the interesting question would be, and what I would want to know, and why I want to do more reading into this, is how would you know abstracta precedes concreta?
Exactly.
And by what means do you attain that knowledge? And is that knowledge accessible other than metaphysical assumptions?
It seems to me that knowledge of abstracta is beyond the reach of humans because of the causal inertness.
Which that is that does seem pretty consistent with theism, though, in some sense. Like it seems consistent with. Well, I'll say this: it seems consistent, more specifically, with Catholic claim that faith is supra-rational. Faith
Yes.
it goes above reason in that sense. I understand your hesitancy, and it's my hesitancy too. I'm just sort of, I mean, I'm kind of playing devil's advocate and thinking about this in different ways because I mean, I am genuinely curious and open to arguments on both sides, but you're right though. There is something about because it's for me, it's about like the access of information of claims. Like that's what I'm interested in too. I mean, it's this goes to so many other more important claims too. Like I mean, the resurrection of Jesus.
Right.
We could get into that as well. But like, uh, yeah. So sorry. Say what you're going to say. I could tell that you had a lot of like, hang on.
No, really, I was just agreeing with you. I think that there's an epistemic problem with universals. I don't think that we can have access to them. I think that any kind of like faith-based appeal to them is just an appeal to mystery. And like I don't think that like an appeal to mystery or like an appeal to faith, I don't think that that's like a reliable pathway to truth because it seems like there's nothing that I couldn't justify just by appealing to mystery. You know, like um,
Yeah.
so my pet project as of late has been like comparing the transgenderism with transubstantiation. So like I could just say like, oh, I really am a woman. Like I really am. And the substance of maleness has left my body and the substance of femaleness has like transubstantiated into the accidents that make me up.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and and how do I know that this transubstantiation of like my gendered substance has happened? It's a miracle. It's a mystery. I take it on faith. And you have no epistemic access to the way that I feel. So what are you going to do? Are you just going to be like, I guess I'm just going to take Kevin's word? Or are you going to say like, well, no, because I don't think that, and, we don't need to get into that whole thing, but I just don't think that like an appeal to faith is like a reliable pathway to true beliefs.
No, that makes sense. I mean, I would go like with the issue of trans, I go more like psychological because like the issue of gender incongruity or gender dysphoria, as it's called in other words. But because that to me is a yeah, because that to me is more of a subjective thing, which I do believe is valid. I guess hot take. Because like I mean, I have no issue with yeah with trans.
Oh,
But
same. I have very good friends who are trans.
yeah,
I
same too.
as a nominalist, I don't think that their substances have changed. But as a nominalist, like
Yeah.
I don't think that there is such a thing as like gender to begin with. Kind of like it's all just
Oh yeah, like I would say, like obviously, like biological sex is an objective thing,
Yeah.
but like gender, that's very culturally determined.
Mm-hmm.
Like I think it's kind of absurd that people think that's objective. That's so relative. Like that's not even. I don't know. I know I'll get hate for that, but but I actually was thinking like maybe this is too big of a topic to talk about in this. Maybe just briefly in 30 seconds. But would you say that like transgenderism is more consistent with like a nominalist approach to things,
It depends,
or
I
if
think.
that's even the right question?
Yeah, I think it totally depends on like what we mean when we talk about like what does it mean to change your gender. Um, I find that some like gender theorists will talk about it in like a like robustly real way. Like they will talk about how like yes, even though and they won't use this language, but they'll say something to the effect of even though the accidents haven't changed, the substance has changed. And like to to that gender theorist, I just plain old disagree that like the stuff and they're not using this Aristotelian language, but sometimes they do that. And then other gender theorists will just say stuff along the lines of like, there is no gender or sex because we are all, molecules in motion, and so call yourself whatever you want. It's all good. And at that, I'm like, yeah. I'm on board with that. Um, you know, And I think that people should be able to call themselves whatever they want, and live however they want. And I'm very libertarian in that sense. Um, I'm not on board with the idea that like there's a very popular slogan like, you know, like trans women are women, and like, what do you mean by that? Do you mean like the substance of women? Because then I disagree. But do you just mean that like we should refer to them as such? Yeah, then I do agree. You know what I mean? So it's a tricky question.
Right. Yeah. That's definitely a fair. Yeah, because that's my view too. Is that I'm willing to use preferred pronouns and all. Yeah. I mean that's pretty much what I wanted to say on that. I don't want to get
I think that's fine.
it's too many controversial things in here.
Yeah,
But
too many controversial things in one day.
I'm trying to think where to go next from here, though. I guess. So here's a question that I mean I asked myself this. So this is not without self-criticism and reflection. What do you think it would take to change your mind?
I get this.
And not to any particular view, but like, well, let's just say Catholicism. So like, what would it take to change your mind?
Yeah, so I get this one a lot. So I've actually thought about it a lot, and I have like two like go-to answers. Um, and the first is just I call it like my own Damascus Road experience.
Mm-hmm.
So when Paul was on the road to Damascus, he got struck blind. He heard a voice from the heavens. You know, whatever. Um, I view this as like a direct imbuing of knowledge by God into Paul's brain. Like Paul was convinced after Damascus Road. And it does not seem metaphysically impossible that God would be able to directly imbue me in the same way. I'm not saying it has to be as dramatic. Like, in fact, it doesn't need to be dramatic at all. God could just, bam, imbue me with the knowledge that, you know, the Catholic Church is the one true church. And then I would just know. I would just know beyond the shadow of a doubt. Like, that doesn't seem metaphysically impossible to me at all.
Right.
I don't need to be struck blind. I don't need to hear a voice. I just need to, like, all of a sudden, I would just be like, oh, I know. I know that this is the case now. That seems totally metaphysically possible to me. And so that's kind of like my always go-to answer. Like, a direct imbuing of knowledge a la Damascus Road. That's one way. A less miraculous way would just be some kind of syllogism that ends with, like, therefore, the Catholic Church is the one true church. And if that syllogism is like valid and sound, then bam, I'm gonna be in pretty much. Like if I can't deny the validity and the soundness of a syllogism that ends like that, I'm gonna be in. What that syllogism looks like, I have no idea. No idea. But if it ended with that conclusion, and if it had, you know, if it was both valid and sound, I'd be in. So those are two things that like would definitely get me for sure.
Yeah, that's that's good. I mean, I think for me it would be well. I mean, there are certain arguments for the resurrection that seem, or there's certain facts that even skeptics say that kind of give me pause. Like Bart Ehrman has said that it's pretty much historically sound that the apostles had visionary experiences of Jesus, and that's kind of like what.
I think that Paul, like whatever happened on Damascus Road, I think that Paul had some kind of crazy experience.
Right, and I know some people would you could argue, at least with Paul, it's harder to do this with groups from what we know psychologically about group hallucination. But like you could argue for Paul, at least schizophrenia or something like that. And but I guess because it's groups, it's more. I think that's more interesting to me that the fact that it's multiple people, and also it's the fact that their own cultural setting kind of mitigates like the motivation for it, like being first century Jews, believing that someone rose from the dead would have been kind of weird because the traditional view, even at the first century, with a lot of even with other Second Temple Jewish beliefs going around, most Jews, like all Jews, believed that Yahweh was going to raise everyone else from the dead on the last day. So to say someone rose from the dead is kind of weird. So it's kind of weird to make that up. It's not that it couldn't be made up, but like, why would they make that up when it's kind of incompatible with the soil of religion that they're coming from?
Yeah.
Then you could say the same thing about like other religions that splintered off from other religions, like Buddhism splintered off from Hinduism, and so on and so forth. So it's not like a steel ironclad argument, but it is something I think about. And then I'll just try to be brief and I'll let you talk. But I guess other things like, beauty, and then like objective morality seems pretty. I don't know. I kind of feel like it'd be hard to take any moral claim seriously if there's no objective morality to me.
Hmm.
I mean, I have anxiety and depression, so like on my bad days, like I'm just kind of like a moral nihilist and just like nuke the planet, everyone dies, like do not go quietly into that good night, just destroy everything, type of thing. But hyperbole, people. I'm not for genocide, but but there are times though where it does seem, especially with suffering. I know this, some theists may find this cliche, but like, I'm a big animal lover, so it's like when anything suffers, when animals suffer, when children suffer, it makes it like, people talk about, oh, the complexity of the eye or the complexity of this or that thing, and it's like, well, what about the complexity of the worm that's eating through an African child's skull and while they're starving to death, when there's enough resources and money to finance and alleviate poverty as well, instead of just 1% having all the wealth throughout the world. But that's another thing. So, but yeah. So those are just kind of my rambling thoughts and stuff. So I think what would bring me back is like maybe more robust arguments for the resurrection, maybe better, like good, strong, robust arguments for like objective morality, beauty. I still like going to church sometimes just for like the aesthetics of it, but I do not stay to talk to the people. Like I try not to be an asshole or anything, but like most religious people I don't like, to be honest now. Like, because I see myself and I don't like my past self. So
I
that's
don't like
kind
my
of,
past self. I was an absolute asshole. I was the worst. I really was, because I was a trad. I was like an angry trad. I was the worst. But I so I guess a couple of things, right? So
sure. Yeah.
um
No, that was a lot.
yeah, let me try to go in order as best I can.
Yeah.
In terms of group hallucinations, I actually don't think that there were any. So I subscribe to a view that pretty much states that the only things that we know are that like Paul had some kind of vision, but Paul never met Jesus. Like Paul never saw Jesus's body or anything like that. Paul never knew what Jesus actually looked like. Like Paul probably couldn't pick Jesus out of a crowd. And like we know this because Paul never claims to have seen Jesus's body, right? He gets struck blind, he hears a vision from the heavens, and then otherwise he meets James and he meets John and he meets Peter, but he never meets Jesus because Jesus died before Paul's conversion. And he ascended to heaven before Paul's conversion. Then we have Peter. And I do think that Peter was I'm not a Peter mythicist. I think that Peter was a real historical person. And like Peter is probably the person I have like the hardest time like explaining away like his whatever. But I wouldn't be surprised if Peter was somebody who really did believe that Jesus had risen. But we don't have any of Peter's writings. We never have any idea what Peter said, anything like that. Both of the Petrine epistles, I am convinced, were not written by Peter. 2 Peter, I think, is a slam dunk not written by Peter. Like, it was written, like, 70 years after Peter died, not written by Peter. Like, more than 70 years by like, that's being conservative. And even 1 Peter, I don't think was written by Peter. I think that 1 Peter was written shortly after Peter's death. My views here are not unorthodox. This is the view of mainline scholarship today.
Oh yeah, I was about to say there's nothing controversial about what you're saying. So that's a standard fare.
Yeah. So I don't think that we have any of Peter's writings. I don't think that we know hardly anything at all about Peter. The only stuff that we actually know about Peter is what we know through the writings of Paul. That's really all that we know about Peter. So that to me like gives me enough that I kind of just have to throw my hands up in the air and be like, yeah, like, oh, and then we don't have any other, like, we don't have any group appearances. Like Paul mentions the 500, but he doesn't list any of them. And he doesn't like say like, how do you like, I know nothing about the 500. Paul just like, oh yeah, the 500. Yeah. They know about Jesus. Who are they? I don't know. So I don't know about any group appearances. I really don't. I don't know a single group appearance that I can like point to. And then in terms of evidence for the resurrection, I have a really hard time thinking about like what kind of evidence could convince me that somebody rose from the dead 2,000 years ago. Man, I don't know.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
like writings are not going to do it for me. Like, even if we had a whole bunch of writings from like a whole bunch of people and they were all like, yeah, this guy rose from the dead. Like, I saw him get killed. I saw him like, get like raised from the dead. I would still think that the odds of those people lying are greater than the odds of that guy actually rising from the dead.
mm,
What I would need is like actual empirical evidence of somebody coming back from the dead in order to believe it. And I'm not sure what kind of empirical evidence we could have for something that happened 2,000 years ago. So like
yeah,
Jesus would almost need to come back today, get killed and resurrect again for me. You know what I mean? And that's a really hard, like that's
Well,
tough.
are you necessarily saying that testimony evidence itself in written form or otherwise is insufficient for this case, specifically the resurrection? I don't want to, generalize. I want to tie it to the resurrection.
Yeah, I am. If we're going to tie it to the resurrection, I don't think that any amount of testimony could get me there.
Gotcha.
And this is just due to what I know about testimony. Like, testimony is not ranked as highly as empirical evidence in courts of law. There have been studies done on actual eyewitnesses that show how untrustworthy even eyewitness testimony is, and we don't have any eyewitness
Right.
testimony for the
Yeah,
resurrection.
they can conflict. Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe my mind would change if we actually had like legitimately like 500 different people saying that they all had like seen Jesus get killed and raised from the dead. Maybe that would change my mind if we actually had it. I'm not sure. It's hard to say anything with certainty. But I just don't think that testimonial evidence is very good. And I don't know what kind of empirical evidence we could have for something that happened 2,000 years ago. So I'm just like super skeptical just at the face of it. You know what I mean? So that's like a hard,
Yeah, definitely.
yeah, it's just like a hard hill to get over, I guess.
Yeah, this is what I appreciate too about like talking about these things, because when I think I might be either onto something or like thinking something is like convincing me, and I talk to someone else and they're like, "Oh no, this here's some uh, holes or problems or why I don't." And I'm like, "Okay," and you go back to the drawing board. I guess one thing that I've come to peace with is that, in a certain sense, and I know this is not fully possible because of how biased everyone is and the different predilections, different influences, and our own inner psyche and psychology. But to a certain extent, in a certain manner, I would say I've learned to stop caring what the right answers were. And what I mean by that was like I just started going at this like, okay, what's the answer? Not it has to be this. Because like when I was super religious, it was like, oh, it has to be this because my faith and everything hinges upon it. But then after kind of, going through a lot of tumultuous stuff and everything and multiple existential crises, I got to a point where I could calm down and I was just like, what are the answers and what are reasonable interpretations? And there are very intelligent people that disagree on this. And because that's the thing for me, kind of going back to what you said, is that like, metaphysically, the Thomist conception of God or any other Catholic philosophical conception of God, he can imbue everyone with knowledge of who he is, like at any time, like right now. Like revelation, the Bible is not even in principle necessary.
Mm-hmm.
Think about it, because if God has all this capability, he could just be like, all right, you guys are just going to know, and you're going to pass on from generation to generation this knowledge and so forth. You're just going to know it. I mean, that would be way more. That would be way more successful. And here's the thing I get into too, is that if he wants everyone to be saved, I mean, if he's an evil God, then okay. Like if it's a God that, but then again, according to like at least certain church fathers and other Catholic theology, the only God that can exist is a perfectly good God. It's like, well, if God is evil, then he can't exist or he doesn't exist. I mean, and I know there's been various debates like, Martianism with the Old Testament and things like that, and that's a whole other thing. But to me, it's the epistemological difficulty, and also like the very valid reasons that, let's just take what Judaism has for like standing by its tradition. It's like, I feel like most Christians don't realize like Jesus is an Arius to Judaism. Oh, hey, kitty.
Yeah, here's another one.
Like Jesus is Luther. Jesus is Eutyches. Jesus is Apollinarius. Like Jesus in the Talmud is in hell, or at least it is in the Gehenna, Henom. I don't know if I'm saying it right, but the suffering place where false prophets are sent. And obviously, it's not eternal; it's temporal, like in Judaism. But the fact that, I mean, I think there are, sophisticated and clever typological ways that Christians have read the Old Testament, but that's not how they were originally read. Like, I just don't buy that. Like, the way Isaiah was read, 53, and the suffering servant, like, sure, you can talk about Second Temple things that are consistent with it, but that's the thing, it's consistent with it. That's not the same thing as the original intent of the authors. And also, it doesn't really mitigate the rabbinic exegesis to me either. Like, it seems like Christians kind of treat Jews like they're just stupid people who can't read the Old Testament, which is very insulting. It's like, you realize they study Hebrew, like they teach their kid, like the Orthodox Jews and the other conservative Jews, like they drill this, they learn Tanakh, like, and this is, I've been wanting to get more into Judaism because of this, along with other things, and they have a philosophical tradition as well, and so on. And to me, it's just kind of naive to be like, well, if only they just read the Old Testament. Gosh, like, it's, again, this is like the damned if you do, damned if you don't type of thing. And actually, I want to circle back to that because, I'm sorry for rambling so much.
No, it's good.
but circling back to that, this is the thing we talked about before we started the show, is that I fail to see the moral obligation I have on the basis of insufficient evidence that I've explored. Like, it's like going up to someone who was a Catholic of 50, 60 years who's studied the crap out of everything and say, hey, become Hindu. Like just now. Like,
Yeah.
what? That's so dumb.
Right.
Like, it's like, and this is why, to me, like, religious exclusivism is also inherently stupid as well, just because of the complexity of history itself as well, and the philosophies and theologies. And there's a song, the rap artist Dax, he had an album, Dear God, and there's a lyric in there saying, "Dear, why is there one God but so many religions?" And, like, to be honest, I don't really, like, I know there's different, like, explanations, like, it's always circular. Well, in Genesis, and there was the fall. It's like, no, think for a second. Like,
yeah,
because, like, again, this is why the epistemology thing is huge for me. And this is the other thing too. I won't say who, because he's pretty well known in certain Catholic circles, but I was talking to a certain Catholic clergyman, and about, like, some of my doubts and stuff, and we were talking about different things like universalism and other issues and whatever and whatnot, different views of hell, and then eventually, I kept on, like, I did feel bad because I called with, like, the preface of, like, I have questions and stuff I'm struggling with or whatever, would like to have advice, and I felt like I should have reframed it, and because it turned kind of into debate, and I didn't really, that shouldn't have happened on my end. But he asked a question that was very striking and kind of it was a Damascus Road experience moment, I guess, where he said, "James, I'm happy to talk with you about any of these subjects, but I need to know something. Are you calling me to ask me about these things because you want or need me to convince you of them? And that's why And I thought about it, and I was like, there was a part of me that was doing that, but there was, and was a culmination after a lot of, I mean, years, but also other things too, just reading experiences and other things, where you get to a certain point where it's like, it's funny because I know this is brought up a lot in like sola scriptura debates, but it's like, ultimately it is private judgment. Ultimately it is you. Who is going to believe your beliefs for you? Kevin can't believe for me. I can't believe for Kevin. Like, we have to be adults here. We have to be morally responsible. I believe that we're morally responsible for the beliefs that we hold and the evidence and the convictions and stuff that we come to. So it's like, at the end of the day, it's all James. It's all yourself, because if you're going to believe in something that's true, it has to be you. It has to be you that believes it. And ultimately, I kept on, and for different paradigms and so forth, there were valid reasons of, like, structure of authority, religious people, the priests being revered, and so on and so forth. But I got to a point where I was just like, you know what? I'm not stupid. I'm an adult. I know how to think critically. I know what books I want to read. I know what podcasts I want to listen to. I know who I want to spend time with. I know who I don't want to spend time with. And I was just like, after we were talking and after we hung up, I was just like, and my answer to him was initially like, oh no, I'm not, like, I just wanted like help and stuff. But to be honest, like, after later reflection, I'm like, no, there was a part of you that you wanted him to convince you, because that's what you're used to, but you realize that you're not in that space anymore. And that was a self-realization that I was like, and I think so many people are in. Like, I know that's not just like unique to me. But I know that was long, but like, do you have any comments and stuff?
No, I mean, I met with a priest. So after I told my parents that I wasn't religious anymore, I told them that like a few months before I was moving out. So for those few months, I was meeting with the priest once a week. Those meetings with the priest turned into pre-Cana. After I was like, I guess I'm getting married to my girlfriend at the time.
Mm.
But during those meetings, I had a very similar like experience to you, where like, so the priest, awesome priest, by the way, I love the guy. He's a great person. His name is Father McNeely. Um, Father McNeely said like, so like, what's on your mind? And I would just kind of like lay out all these problems for him. And, he tried to, like walk me through them, but I just
Mm-hmm.
didn't find like, he wasn't telling me anything that I couldn't find on the internet, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
and so I kind of just left thinking like, man, like before the internet, I probably would have just had to like take this guy at his word and be like, okay, and like stuck with it. Um, but since I kind of had like already like weighed both sides of the argument, I remember like leaving those meetings being like, yeah, like I'm glad I have somebody to talk to about this stuff, but like frankly, it's not like it's nothing I haven't heard already.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I do think that a lot of people go to clergymen to get convinced. And I think once you're kind of in the space where you're like, I don't need to be convinced anymore. I'm gonna be okay. It's over. You're already not religious.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's so huge. I remember what I was going to ask you before, because this is related to it, to all of this, is in various contexts. I wonder if this is your experience too. Well, I mean, you pretty much said it was, but it's a more specific example of what we talked about before. So it's the principle of, hey, and I'm a big reader. I love reading. I know
Me
you're a big
too.
reader too. So um, when people recommend me books, I usually read them, or I look at it and look at reviews and see if it's worth reading, to see if my friend's judgment is good or not. but but if they're friends I trust, I typically read the books they recommend. Um, but sometimes there's this kind of like almost gaslighting, almost like naive, simplistic apologetics culture thing where it's like, oh, if you read William Lane Craig or Thomas Aquinas or Brant Petrie, I've had that book recommended to me, and I am going to read it. But it's the principle that I can't stand, because the principle is assuming it will answer all of your concerns and objections, which are objective and subjective. Like, it's objective in that there are questions that exist that not only you have, but it's subjective in the sense that you are the subject that is asking them. And what's, to me, is so just kind of incredibly naive and kind of arrogant about this, even though it's often meant, in most cases, with goodwill. It's the fact that it's like, look, that's not how people work. That's not how reality is. It's not how things actually are. Because if I am intelligent, if I am a critical thinker, I'm going to analyze the text. I'm not just going to buy it wholesale.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the problem. Because some people, that's the expectation. And I'm like, no, I'm sorry. But like, no, I'm not just going to just swallow it up.
This book and books like it are not written for people like me and you. They are written for people who already believe and are just looking for another reason to believe. This book is an exercise in apologetics, and it's an exercise in preaching to the choir. I was not impressed by this book. So this book is so out of touch with like modern scholarship. Literally, the first 3 chapters are like, hey, this is why like Matthew is written by Matthew, and Mark's written by Mark, and Luke's written by Luke, and John's written by John, and Peter's written by Peter, and we can just all, and like literally none of the, so this is not an academic book. It's not an academic book. It is a book for Catholics who just want to read stuff that doesn't challenge them so that they can stay comfortable. And that's my least favorite kind of book. This book is uncritical about any, like, it's just name an Orthodox Catholic position and this book will just defend it. And like, it's just, there's no critical thinking at all going on in this book, which is a real shame because I'm sure that Brant Petrie is much smarter than I am. But this is not an academic work. This is popular level work. And this book was written uncritically for an uncritical audience.
Yeah, that's my problem though with apologetics in general. Like, I've read certain apologetics books where they're pretty balanced and pretty upkept with scholarship, but a lot of most, if not most, a lot of apologetic books, it's propaganda. Like, that's not even
Yes.
That's not even
Yes.
me being pejorative.
Yes.
It's not even me being pejorative. It literally is propaganda. It has a certain aim in mind, but to me, and again, I know people are saying, well, James, are you saying that scholarship is neutral and it's just objective? Clearly not, but there are certain circles of thought. But that's the thing, though. There's a liberty of scholarship. There, to me, this is also what I think is so valuable about the secular university as well, is that the only, ideally, and I know there's politics involved in all sorts of things, but ideally, like, the principle should be that academic freedom and the only dogma is no dogma, that anything can be inquired into, anything can be researched, anything can be criticized.
And that is the antithesis of apologetics.
Yeah, and I think that there are more balanced apologetic perspectives, but I think this is the other thing. If I was to become a Catholic again, I think there are so many. There's ethical concerns with apologetics. First of all, I think from just Catholic morality alone, if you're making money off of apologetics, I think that's immoral. I think that's intrinsically evil. Like, the original apologists were suffering martyrdom and persecution, and they did apologetics for free because they knew it would benefit the people they're going to, not to make a buck. Like, and to me, if it's standing by Catholic principles and theology, it needs to be done for free. It needs to be given for free. It can't be, there can't be profit. I think profit corrupts it, like,
yes,
at such a fundamental level. Like, from a Christian perspective.
Yes. The apologetics industrial complex does not allow for people to change their minds, because these people become branded as, so Brant Petrie, he's a Catholic apologist, right? So he is not allowed to come out with some kind of view that isn't in line with Orthodox Catholicism.
Mm-hmm.
And if he did, he'd lose his job. I like the example. It's not a Catholic example, but the New Testament scholar, Mike Licona, was fired for, I forget what university he taught at, but he was fired when he insinuated that perhaps the saints rising from the grave during Jesus' resurrection, as recounted in Matthew, right? And only Matthew,
Oh, yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
Like when the dead rose from the grave and walked around Jerusalem, literally that's the only gospel, the only one gospel records it, if I recall correctly, and I think it's Matthew, and it's not recorded in any secular source. It didn't happen. It didn't happen. The dead did not rise and walk from their graves in Jerusalem in the mid-first century. It didn't happen. Mike Licona knows this, and he insinuated as such in a paper,
Right.
and he got fired from his university for saying that. And I think that that is a prime example. Again, not a Catholic example, but it's a prime example of what the apologetics industrial complex does to the enterprise of free inquiry. Apologetics is a cancer upon free inquiry, and I think it's a detriment to anybody who's honestly pursuing the truth. Apologetics is not the way to go.
Yeah, I mean there's like yeah, I mean there's certain points and limits. Like I mean there's still stuff I think certain apologists are even good at for like introductory material level on different subjects. But there comes a point where it's like, okay, we need to go to scholarship now. We need to go to like what's the academic literature on this subject. What's the scholarly literature? And also that doesn't exclude people. This is what people need to realize. The academic scholarly literature does not exclude people that are not conservative or traditional or faithful.
Exactly. I think that Mike Licona is a kick-butt New Testament scholar. I think he's excellent. I love Mike Licona, and he's pretty darn conservative. Like the thing that is like not conservative about him is that he admits that like the dead walking around in Matthew is like maybe not literal. That's as liberal as he gets.
He also doesn't hold to a evangelical, like Chicago statement view of inerrancy.
Yes, but he holds something really close.
Right, that's the thing. His view is pretty much either like the Catholic view or like what many conservative Anglicans and Lutherans believe.
Yes.
So it's like it's really like a hair breadth.
Yes. He's very conservative. He's not the most conservative, but he's very conservative. My favorite New Testament scholar is Catholic priest Father Raymond Brown. An Introduction to the New Testament is fantastic. I reference that thing all the time. I own the PDF, so I just look up chapters and I read stuff from it all the time when I'm like thinking about something. I'm like, oh, what about, whatever. I reference that book all the time. It's 900 pages. An introduction to the New Testament.
Yeah.
900 pages, 950 pages. Like, quite the introduction. Catholic priest, died a Catholic priest, died in good standing with the church. Raymond Brown's views are more in line with critical modern day scholarship. Now, Father Brown died in like the 90s or something. Like he died a while ago, but he doesn't hold to the traditional authorship of the Gospels. He doesn't hold to Petrine authorship of the Petrine epistles. So he's more liberal, yes. But he's a Catholic. So evidently you could be Catholic and still hold these liberal views. So I'll get off my high horse, but.
Oh, you're fine. Kevin, I'll link all your stuff in the description below to your channel and so on and so forth. I really appreciate having you on. Is there anything you would like to let other people know that you're up to, or anything you have coming in the future, or a plug for anything?
I have two different scripts bouncing around right now. I've got one script on transgenderism and transubstantiation and kind of compare contrast the two. And then I have another script on mark and priority that I'm working on, just because I've been talking with people who hold Matthean priority, and I just think it's worth making a video on, just kind of share my views. But other than that, nothing really going on. Speaking of clergymen, I'm trying to get clergymen to come onto my show for a Conversations with Catholics episode. I'm going back and forth with one priest right now, seeing if I can get him. I don't want to say his name yet, only because we haven't nailed out a date or anything. But that's what I have going on. Otherwise, not a whole lot. I work full time outside of YouTube, so I don't get to do as much YouTube stuff as I would like. But I think I put out a fine amount of content. I'm not worried about it.
Yeah, definitely. Everyone go check out Kevin's YouTube channel if you haven't subscribed to it. Well, I hope you guys appreciate this episode, despite some of the maybe controversial things that were said. But I think it will benefit many people, and that'll be listened to critically and charitably.
Thanks for having me, James.
Can you still hear? Yeah, good having you, Kevin. I love it having you back on again.
And I'd love to have you on my show.
Yeah, definitely. I'll let you know about dates and times. I'm starting a new job, so got to figure out schedule wise. But yeah, definitely love to come on.
Cool. Sounds good. Thanks again, James.
Thanks again, Kevin. All right, you have a good one.